Hi, my name is Holly Alfano. I'm the CEO of ILMA. Welcome to LubeTrends. If you joined us last week for the LubeTrends session, you may notice that I look a little different and I'm in a different place than I was before. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties when recording last week's session that caused some of the audio to be garbled. So we have re-recorded the relevant parts that were garbled last time so that everyone can have all the information they need. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but hopefully this recording will clean everything up and we'll have a solid LubeTrends session. I'd like to take a minute just to thank the sponsor of LubeTrends, Chevron Ornite. They've been our valued partner since 2020, and we greatly appreciate their support. I'd also like to introduce our panelists today. John Howell from GHS Resources has been a consultant for ILMA for several years, for at least 14 years that we know of. And he is here to discuss pending changes to OSHA's HAZCOM standard. We also have Jim Carroll, VP of Schaefer Manufacturing, and also the chair of our Engine and Transmission Committee. He is going to discuss pending engine oil standards. So we have that to look forward to in the moments ahead. Finally, and last but not least, Jeff Leiter, ILMA's General Counsel, has been working with the association for 40 plus years. And he has a number of issues that he's going to be discussing today, one of which was the one that we had the technical issues with. And we actually have an update to that issue. EPA has pulled back the rule, and they will not be moving forward with the oily wastewater regulation. So that's a big win for our industry and great news. We're going to kick things off with a discussion of updates to OSHA's hazard communication standard. John Howell is going to fill us in. Just so everyone knows the status of this regulation is over at OMB. That's normally the last step that for a regulation before it becomes issued. OMB does an agency review of the issue, and that's in process now. In the next few weeks, probably either toward the end of the year or sometime after the first of the year, we could see that regulation issued by OSHA. So we will be watching for that, and we will keep everyone up to date. Please stay on top of your ILMA emails and all the information and news in Compounding's magazine. It's the way to stay informed as these regulations and other issues emerge. And now I will turn it over to John. Thank you.
Jeff mentioned the number of SDSs for products that our members who are included in NAICS code 3241912, but there's hundreds of thousands of SDSs, and if all of our members need to review and potentially change each of those SDSs, oh my goodness gracious, the cost to ourselves would range, we estimate, between $275 million to over $400 million. And so it's going to be costly no matter how we look at this. What can we expect? Well, until that final rule is published, we don't know the answers to some of these very specific questions. But one of the questions we need to consider is this: will OSHA adopt the new concentration ranges that were proposed, which are going to be or likely to be very similar, if not identical, to the ones that Health Canada proposed and has adopted in their amendments to the WHMIS, the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System rule published last year. So that's one question. Another question is, how is OSHA going to address the issues of foreseeable emergencies and versus normal conditions of use. That was another one of the topics for which a couple of years ago now, Quaker Houghton's Robin Dilts and myself addressed an oral testimony to OSHA. So that's a big question. A question that you yourselves may be able to answer, at least those of you who utilize safety data sheet authoring softwares, is how are those authoring software companies responded? They may have already provided to you updates to your system so as to allow you to write SDSs that are WMIS compliant for the new Health Canada rules. But if you haven't gotten an update from your authoring software company and you do business in Canada, it would be an appropriate time to ask them when they're going to provide that update. And for those of us, and I know there are several ILMA manufacturing members who don't use authoring software at the moment, what are you guys all going to do? Because it's likely that every SDS will have to be amended in some form because the new updates to the Purple Book, the GHS book, revision 7 and with some of revision 8 brought over, they rearranged the physical properties in section 9. So even if nothing else changes, the arrangement of physical properties does change in each and every SDS. Another question which we have to look to OSHA's final rule for a direction on is will OSHA require a date release for shipment on labels? We had argued against that, saying that the batch numbers, batch date information, batch lot information was likely to be found on a label, and we didn't think that the date release for shipment would add any value, would be confusing, but we don't know how OSHA is going to deal with that. And is OSHA going to publish a how-to guide on the changes to Appendix A? We thought that was going to be a very important thing for OSHA to do because the changes, particularly when it comes to incorporating non-animal testing methods for some tox data for skin irritation and eye irritation, which are the two biggest hazards that ILMA manufacturing members' products typically have, now needs to consider that data if it is out there. And lastly, perhaps the biggest question is what's going to be the timetable for implementation? Is it going to be 3 years? Is it going to be 2 years? We just don't know yet. Although we can look to perhaps to Canada, who published their amendments to their hazardous products regulations on January 4th of this year, now some 11 months ago, and they did the same thing. They aligned their rules to GHS Purple Book Rev 7 with some of the revision 8 in there as well. In Canada, they have allowed for a 3-year transition program, and that ends on December 14th of 2025, when everybody needs to be in compliance. Health Canada says that their amendments and their technical guidance, which they just published a month and a half ago, would fulfill Canada's obligations under the Canada-U.S. Regulatory Cooperation Council. That's an agreement that between Canada and the U.S., which, among other things, has the two jurisdictions making changes to SDSs in parallel, or as close to as that can be done, still keeping up with the requirements in each jurisdiction. And indeed, Canada did reaffirm the prescribed concentration rules, which had been previously used in Health Canada. They're continuing that for the new WMIS updates as well. And so we'll see how closely OSHA matches the Health Canada concentration ranges when they publish their final rule. In any case, there's lots that's going to happen. And just so you know, your association is going to be monitoring this very closely. And if you've got some questions on that, please write them down, include them in the Q&A chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the session today. And I think it's time to transition over to drum reconditioning. So let me turn this over, Holly and Jeff, to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, John. Jeff, yeah, I know you've been very involved in this reconditioned drum rule, and that, the impact to ILMA members and a lot of other manufacturers who use drums is going to be could be very significant. So if we're looking forward to hearing from you on the latest and what members can expect.
Thanks, Hi. For folks that know me well, I mean, they know that I'm usually pretty even-keeled and laid back. This issue has gotten me very excitable from the standpoint of EPA having a solution looking for a problem. And when Holly says this cuts across manufacturers, I mean, with the containers that ILMA members use, 55-gallon drums, various size totes or IBCs, it affects the customers as well. EPA published what's known as an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on August 11th. We had some knowledge that this may be coming. What an advance notice of proposed rulemaking is effectively is the agency telling the world, we believe as regulators that there's an issue that we need to address, and we're looking to get information. Certainly ILMA views itself, and I think proudly, as honest brokers of information. We engaged the agency early and frequently on this topic. But EPA believes that this advance notice is necessary to get comments to help the agency address issues that it believes exists across the life cycle of empty containers. They cite in their ANPRN to a September 2022 damage case report that replied really only to reconditioner facilities, some 181 facilities across the country. EPA is concerned with drum reconditioners accepting a large number of non-RCRA empty containers. And I think everyone is pretty familiar with what RCRA empty means. And that as a result, a number of these reconditioners are experiencing a number of events. They're having fires, spills, accidents, things like that. But was more troubling to ILMA and to me in the notice was the implication, if not the explicit statement by EPA, that use container generators, ILMA members and other folks that package their products in these containers, have an incentive to dispose of hazardous waste through these empty containers. And that incrementally over the space of a year, that there's conceivably millions of gallons of hazardous waste that are going unregulated and slipping through the system. So EPA believes, and to the extent that they need to address this, they came up with a number of regulatory options for used drum generators for ILMA members. They were looking at either modifying or eliminating the empty container rule, requiring the rinsing at your facility of the drums before they're turned over to a reconditioner, labeling and some record keeping requirements that would be layered on top of what you're already doing as far as batch codes, what you're doing as far as OSHA, in other ways to track your products. ILMA's got together quickly with a task force through our committees, worked on this. I mean, the ILMA Board designated this as an extremely high priority. We conducted several surveys of the members. Our used drum task force met with EPA a couple of weeks ago on the 14th. Holly gave about a 7-minute presentation at a listening session EPA conducted on November 1st. We've engaged it with other associations, RIPA, the Reusable Industrial Packaging Association, Alfano, that's also a packaging group, the ACD, which is the Association of Chemical Distributors, the Adhesives Council, the U.S. Chamber. A number of groups got together to work on this. And then we submitted detailed comments to the agency just last week on Wednesday. And what we said in those comments is that EPA, there's no need to alter or revise the RCRA empty container provision. The system works really well. In fact, to the extent that a significant percentage of the drums that are emptied by our members, they held raw materials. At the cost of those raw materials, there's no incentive for ILMA members not to make sure that those drums are completely empty. So there's mechanical means and other efforts that are made to ensure that that high quality, high priced product is removed from the containers. We estimated, I believe, if we did the 1-inch rule, which is what the empty container provision is for 55-gallon drum, that, you know, over the course of the year, it could add up to several $100,000 that ILMA members would leave on the table. And so we have every financial incentive to make sure those drums are RCRA empty, and we actually manage them properly. We kind of went ballistic on this rinsing provision. Many of the petroleum products would require distillates, and you would just be creating an enormous amount of waste that's totally unnecessary. The generators or the reconditioners handle this as is today very effectively, and it's totally unnecessary, should be taken off the table. Lastly, these adders for labeling and record keeping we thought were just redundant, unnecessary. You know, if these things are hazardous waste, then you would have to manifest them anyway, that there really is no reason to do this. We cited in the comments, by the way, efforts where ILMA members with, let's say, stainless steel totes have a loop system with their customers. Under EPA's used oil management standards, there's polishing and other things that are done with customers that use these containers, and there's every incentive to treat them as a non-hazardous waste. What we did say we could do and should do is to work with the agency on coming up with some guidance materials, best practices. One of the things EPA did ask for and comment on is whether, you know, each facility should come up with this operating plan as to how to handle drums. So we said it's too burdensome. Just let's put out some guidance, some practices, and ensure that those, you know, are effective in terms of making sure that the drums are empty. And at the same time, if the reconditioners take in a drum that's non-RCRA empty, then there's a process to deal with that as well. So hopefully we're in a position where we've convinced EPA that it's unnecessary to move in the direction of a regulatory and perhaps this non-regulatory option of some guidance and compliance materials would help. But, you know, the comments just went in. EPA is going to analyze those and make some decisions within the agency as to what to do next. We did point out, by the way, when you look at ESG, sustainability, and some of these other topics, that the agency, what they're looking direction-wise on a regulatory basis is contradictory to those other goals, that it actually would create more waste, use more power, you know, all those kind of things that they're trying to go the other direction on. Certainly when we get to the Q&A, I'm happy to elaborate further on those, but I'll turn it back to you, Holly.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I did notice that EPA, when we had our meeting with them, they did seem very interested in our comments and our concerns. So that was, you know, encouraging. So we'll see where this goes, but I thought they really paid attention to what we had to say, which is great. Mm-hmm. So moving on to our next slide, I'm going to now turn it over to Jim Carroll, who is, as I mentioned, chairman of our Engine and Transmission Committee, and he is going to bring us up to date on some specification changes.
Thanks, Holly. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let's talk a little bit about IFC. IFC, the International Fluids Consortium, it's a group of about 11 OEMs, predominantly Asian manufacturers of passenger cars, who got together and created this International Fluids Consortium, essentially, and then their stated philosophy is to simplify the specification system. It really grew out of some frustration that the 0W8 and 0W12 viscosities were not being approved fast enough to suit their needs and wants, and pretty much decided to start their own group. There's, as I said, there's 11 OEMs, primarily Asian, and there's 12 industry affiliates. These are additive companies and laboratories, essentially, that make up the International Fluids Consortium. Right now, they have drafted two specifications, GEO1, which covers oils ranging in viscosity from 0W8 to 10W30, and GEO2, which covers oils that can be used along with engines that have gasoline particulate filters. So those two specifications are pretty much written and drafted. Right now, they're working on the base oil read across guidelines for those two specifications before they're going to be published by IFC. The third one that IFC is working on right now, GEO3, will be for light duty gasoline powered vehicles. And the primary emphasis of GEO3 will be on fuel economy and emissions reductions. So those are the three categories that IFC is working on right now. And as I said, GEO1 and GEO2 pretty much complete, other than the base oil read across, and then GEO3 in its first stages as far as drafting as that is concerned. The next topic I just want to touch on, PC12. So PC12 on the heavy duty diesel side, and we were fortunate enough to have Rommel Atienza from Oronite talk to us at our annual meeting this fall regarding PC12 and some of the drivers. Right now, it's targeted for June of 2027. And the primary drivers, of course, are emissions and fuel economy. The some of the tests that are being looked at, and some of the issues with all of these is some of the tests are on obsolete equipment, and so the tests have to be replicated on newer and more pertinent equipment. Some of the tests, looking at the ability to handle soot carrying capability, oxidative stability, and the ability of the oil to help reduce wear. Also new under PC12, the looking at the reduction in the DI packs, looking for a reduction of both sodium and potassium. And this is because of the after treatment, the catalytic converter, essentially, for the diesel engines. They're also looking heavily at how after treatment affects phos and how the oils will keep phosphorus retention. And so those are some of the new areas that we're going to go to in PC12. The sequence testing is not solid yet. A lot of the sequence testing is still kind of squishy and up in the air. And that's being ironed out concurrently, obviously, as some of the chemistries being formulated. Very similar to PC11, when we had CK4 and FA4, the PC12 will be again a two-tiered category. There will be your off-road mileage focused FA4 type, whatever that designation will be. And then, of course, the CK4 traditional backward compatible on the other side. On the FA4 side, the fuel economy side, we may see viscosities as low as a W20. So whether it's a 0W20 or a 5W20, we could see viscosities as low as a 20 weight introduced in for diesel engines. So that should be interesting, and that should be challenging for some of the testing, the sequence testing that will go on that. Again, that's targeted for June of 2027, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy around this one. This seems like it's It's going to flow pretty well in standard traditional. It's not as big a change as PC11 was, and so I think it'll probably go quite a bit better than we saw how PC12 PC11 was such a game changer. And then finally, we want to touch a little bit on ILSAC GF7. And ILSAC GF7, there's a lot of concerns about it, and because of the timing. And so right now, the ILSAC GF7 is going to last nearly 10 years, which is the average specification. Average life has been 6 years to date. And if you remember, as we talked about, part of IFC's philosophy was to simplify the specification system, particularly for passenger car motor oils. And so this kind of fits in that narrative, in that it'll be 10 years before we go to a category change within the ILSAC. This is causing some consternation within some of the OEMs. A lot of the testing that's going to be introduced, that's going to be new, has to do with LSPI and chain wear on aged engine oil. And so that kind of indicates to me that the OEMs are experiencing some issues with wear and catastrophic damage due to LSPI, and that they didn't feel that some of the earlier testing was sufficient or robust enough to verify that the oil protecting it. So this testing is still needs to be ironed out, and at the same time, you have the OEMs requesting a much faster process, simplify the specification process. There's a lot going on. There's Afton proposed to move GF7 up. Oronite had a similar proposal, but not maybe as aggressive as Afton's. And so this is going to continue to be an extremely changing landscape. And we'll continue to monitor this, and hopefully continue to have speakers at our engine and transmission committee meetings who could talk to the GF7, PC12, and then of course the IFC categories as we go over the next couple of years. So looking forward to questions during the question and answer session. That concludes my portion this afternoon.
Thanks, Jim. Next, we're going to talk about another potentially significant issue, and that is oily wastewater. And I'm going to turn that over to Jeff.
Thank you, Holly. Let me shift gears now to this oily wastewater issue with EPA. This is another example in my mind of the agency having a solution in search of a problem. Everyone should be very familiar at this point with the EPA used oil management standards. ILMA was instrumental in the promulgation of those standards back in 1992. At the time, ILMA fought for, along with other groups like the National Oil Recyclers Association, to create a scheme in which there was an incentive to lubricant manufacturers and others, properly manage used oil, and it won't need to be regulated, managed, and handled as a RCRA hazardous waste. If you don't follow those management standards, then you have to go through the more costly, more rigorous in terms of paperwork and that in terms of the requirements of the RCRA Subtitle C hazardous waste regulations. The system has worked really well for 30 years. EPA has done nothing to amend or change those regulations. It's become part of what you all do every day. So what's happened? Several years ago, starting in the state of Vermont, and then carrying on to some other state hazardous waste officials, as they were going through their reauthorization process of their state hazardous waste programs with EPA, suggested to the agency that a loophole exists in the used oil management standards, and that if you have a used oil and wastewater mixture with less than 50% used oil in that aqueous solution or emulsion, then there's an incentive there for people to try to get rid of hazardous waste through that oily wastewater mixture. When we're looking at this, the statement we use, the state hazardous waste officials, believe that there's an incentive in these oily wastewater mixtures where there's less than 50% used oil for facilities to try to mask and get rid of hazardous waste in that mixture. We think they got it backwards. The used oil management standards create a presumption of mixing at certain levels, and the burden then shifts with a rebuttable presumption to the facility to show that, in fact, they did not mix any hazardous waste into that oily wastewater mixture. This is common. It's something ILMA fought for, particularly with respect to polishing and reclaiming metalworking fluids that are, been claimed from a customer's machining sumps. And anyway, where this led to was the agencies, these state officials, telling EPA that they need to do something on this. EPA has initiated a permitting oversight project, and they buried in that project doing something to look at this oily wastewater mixture issue. They conducted a seminar or webinar in October of last year. And again, buried in there was that they plan to put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, much like they've done for the used containers. And they were looking to do this in the first quarter of next year. Again, as I mentioned at the top of this, it's a solution in search of a problem. ILMA quickly organized with other groups, including the National Recyclers Association, to really start trying to convey to the agency staff working on this issue that this is an area that they really don't want to go down, that it's counterproductive, that there's no environmental justification for it. In fact, what's the justification for the 50% threshold? We just don't see how there's a magic line at 50%, particularly when, let's say, you're dealing with water-based metalworking fluid emulsions that you're trying to reclaim and recycle. Similarly to that, we just don't see what the environmental benefit is to put folks through managing and testing these products. If they were to fail one of the 4 RCRA characteristic tests, then you would need to manage that mixture as a hazardous waste. It just distorts the entire system for little, and as we can find, no true environmental benefit. As I mentioned earlier, the rule does contain a presumption of mixing, particularly if halogenates are at a certain level. And there is that ability for the facility to rebut that presumption with actual evidence to show that they did not, in fact, mix hazardous waste to get rid of it. As I mentioned, we've worked closely with NORA, the Quick Lube folks, NAM, API, and other groups to try to explain to EPA just why this is unnecessary. We've also reached out to the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy. We've started working with the other groups on developing a congressional advocacy plan. So where we stand right now is we're looking at EPA the first quarter of next year in an advance notice proposed rulemaking, which is yet to go over to the Office of Management and Budget for review, asking folks for comment on whether they need to address this issue at all. If we've been successful and done our job over the last 6 months or so with the agency, there's a probability that we could have convinced the EPA to go ahead and just decide not to pursue this issue of oily waste. That would be the best outcome that we could see at this particular point. Let me give a plug for the Metalworking Fluids Conference. This issue certainly will be front and center at that discussion in the beginning of January in Atlanta at the conference. And we'll certainly go into more detail on it at that point. And I'll turn it back to you at this point.
Another question that we've gotten here in the Q&A, and it was one of the many other issues that we are following, has got to do with extender producer responsibility. And what is ILMA's position, or how is it working toward advocacy in response to existing and potential future EPR responsibility regulations for plastic packaging? Jeff, do you want to try to tackle that one?
Yes, this is an issue that we've been following. We actually, oops, am I screwing up again, quality-wise?
I think your screen is
connection?
freezing. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me okay, Holly?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So this, we did put out a sort of a white paper back 2 or 3 months ago to kind of explain what the issue is to members and some of the likely problems that we're looking at. Right now, there are 4 states that have passed extended producer responsibility or EPR legislation: Maine, Oregon, Colorado, and California. The gist of this legislation really is to force the cost of proper disposal of containers, plastic containers, back on the manufacturer brand owner. And there's ways to do this largely through taxes. In some instances, that would be administered by what's known as a PRO, or Producer Responsibility Organization. The issue that we're looking at is, first of all, are lubricant containers covered? In Maine, the answer is yes. Oregon and California, probably. In Colorado, the answer is maybe. I mean, it's a typical lawyer speaking, right? There's just a number of issues there that are trying to be worked out through the implementation at the regulatory level by these statutes that were adopted by the legislatures. Things they're looking at is their pathway to exemptions. Let's say if you go to California, for example, that they anticipate that there'd be multiple PROs. Colorado, there'd be 1. So we're engaged on the issue. We're trying to get our handle on the information. There's actually a group that's been formed called the National Lubricant Recycling or Container Recycling Coalition, NLCRC. We've been engaging with them to see whether that's something that ILMA should participate in as a way to leverage resources for the members. Right now, it's got Exxon, Castrol, some of the bigger companies, some of the larger container manufacturers. But it's coming. Our expectation is that more states will consider this type of legislation. There's, I'll call it EPR Light, that's already passed in New Jersey and Connecticut. Like I said, we've discussed that in this paper that we put out not too long ago. I mean, Holly, I'm not sure if it's up on the website, but perhaps we ought to put it back up for folks to look at it. Like I say, if specific questions, folks can get in touch with us, but we see this as an emerging issue that ILMA needs to stay engaged on. And like I say, we're trying to find the most effective way to leverage the association's resources and get that information to the members.
Yeah, we had a question about the EPR white paper being reshared with the membership. And yes, we can definitely reshare any of the information that we have sent out previously. And if there's something specific, Raymond, please let me know, and we'll make sure you get a copy of it, and we can share it with the whole membership as well. I have a couple questions for Jim Carroll. So Jim, if you want to turn your camera back on, that would be great.
There we go.
Yeah, one is, please provide clarification on ILSAC GF7 timing. Was Jim indicating it will take 10 years before this new category is launched? Or was he saying it would last 10 years once it's launched? Please clarify.
Yeah, that's my bad. I understand the question. Sorry, Lynn. It right now GF7 is set for January of 2028. If that is the case, that will have been 10 years since the introduction of that category, which is the longest time for any single category. So I guess I probably jumped around a little bit on that. So apologize for that. So yeah, January of 2028 is when ILSAC GF7 is if nothing else changes. But again, both Afton and Ornite are looking to move that up at the behest of the OEMs. Ironically, the reason that it's taken longer is because the new test the OEMs want on LSPI, aged oil, and chain wear on aged oil, that new test needs some more development time, and so that's probably the critical path in order to get that accomplished. But it's set for January of 2028, and if that stays, it will be the longest for any one of those ILSAC categories.
Also a question on IFC. Can you clarify what GO1 and GO2 covered, and how do these integrate with the current API of ASEA standards?
So the GEO1 and GEO2 are standards. The first GEO1 simply takes into account lower viscosity passenger car motor oils than the current API. GEO2, same viscosities, however, for gas particulate filtered equipped vehicles. So GEO1 and GEO2 are standards. As far as API is concerned, they really don't. They don't mesh, and that was one of the concerns that we raised. When we engaged the IFC nearly 2 years ago, is that it's just.
We have another situation with camera freezing. Sorry about that. Jim, maybe keep your camera off and just have the audio on. Let's try that. Maybe just
That was
turn.
strange.
Okay, you're better. Okay, you're back.
Yeah, it kind of like just I heard you say we have another situation and shoo.
Yeah.
Okay. Long and short of it is, though, it does not mesh with API or JASO or ASEA. It is its own standalone standard that the International Foods Consortium came up with.
And just because IFC is new, can you tell us what OEMs are involved in this? You mentioned
Yes.
that, yeah, just to give a little bit.
I have that. Yeah, it's they're predominantly Aurora Bay, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Nissan, Renault, Subaru.
Oh, there we go. We lost him again. Sorry. I really apologize about all the technical issues that we're having, but it does sound pretty comprehensive in terms of most of the Asian OEMs are participating in that. So
Yes. Yeah, and I got cut off before anybody could tell me what a great job I did pronouncing all those names.
Yeah, you did a good job. Nice.
Oh, great. All right.
We had an earlier question about whether, let's see, where is that?
There was one, Holly, I
okay,
saw about OSHA when the HAZCOM comes out.
Would we be providing a training session or webinar? And absolutely, yes, we would be doing that. So just we will be doing on any of these rules. Once we get a final rule, we certainly will develop some training materials or a webinar that we'll share with all all the members. Another question is, I may have missed it, but is ILMA still looking to write a letter that members can send out to their customers about the reconditioned drum issue? Jeff? Yes.
You know, we hadn't thought about that as something because of the short time frame to turn around for comments, but it's not a bad idea. I think we could probably put something together that members can give to their customers just to let them know that this is being looked at, and perhaps remind them to make sure their drums are empty when they turn them over to their reconditioner.
Okay. Just checking to see if we have any additional questions. Really appreciate all the questions. It's great that, okay, another one for Jim, and hopefully we won't have too many technical issues. Jim mentioned an issue with sodium and potassium. Is that from the finished additive package components that are interacting with the after treatment system?
So the phos range doesn't look to be reduced. And in fact, phosphorus retention will be one of the tests. The reduction in sodium and potassium concerns for after treatment. And so, and that's a proposal from the EMA on the chemical and ash limits. And that's to some extent of all that I know about that right now. So more to come, but it doesn't look like the phos will be reduced. The sodium and potassium will be reduced. And again, phos retention will be looked at probably for the first time.
Okay. And then another question here, would it be possible to share a quick recap of the steel drum situation? I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for here. Are you talking about like a some kind of written recap? Or would you like us to try to address it again? Jeff, do you have any additional comments you want to make about the steel drum situation, about the drum situation, because that also affects IBCs and other, types of containers. So,
I mean, in terms of the empty containers, we're looking at the 55-gallon drums and then the all different sizes of totes. So the IBCs, typically in the 200 to 275, 300-gallon category. And I think again the issue is just if EPA is looking at for folks to go back through their drum management, their empty container management, and just take a good look to make sure that in fact we're doing RCRA empty, if not more, and moving in the right direction on that.
So, we've gone over a lot of information here today, and we've gotten some great questions, and I really appreciate it. And some of them actually touched on some of the topics that we wanted to mention briefly that are high priority issues. Jeff, assuming you have audio, would you try maybe turn your camera off and see if with less that might be easier? Can you give that a shot?
Okay. I mean, one of the things that we've got on the chat there is a question about Prop 65 short form warnings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, this is one of the things that when OEHA, and John Howell, see if you might want to jump in on some of this, is that California adopted these Prop 65 warnings. They gave folks two choices for the safe harbor under the statute. You could have the long form and then the short form. And most small businesses like the short form safe harbor warning simply because it was short. OEHA published a couple of weeks ago a proposal. They're the ones that oversee the Prop 65 regulations. It's the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. But they put out a notice saying they intend to change the short form warning. I guess I would best describe it as long form light. They feel that this change is necessary to better inform consumers of potential hazards. My own personal view is that there's an overwarning in California to the point it dilutes any effectiveness of the warnings altogether. We really haven't gone beyond that, really, in terms of assessing what to do on this. Our sense is that OEHA is finding some reason to do away with these short form warnings that we think doesn't make sense. But yeah, I think that's one of the issues that we need to be addressing over the next couple of weeks. John Howell, I don't know if you've got any other thing to add on that, but.
Nothing further to add on the specifics yet. As I say, we're addressing it. Although, again, most of what OEI is doing is directed towards consumer products as opposed to industrial products. But we'll need to take a closer look at the proposal just to be sure that we're not overlapping into the industrial products area, Joe.
Okay, so Holly, I'm sorry I digressed. And in terms of some of these other issues, I think I point out, I mean, ILMA's board looking at, we've kind of, as policy council, given an overview to the executive committee and the board about issues on the horizon that we just think have a significant or potential significant impact on the members. Certainly electrical vehicle electrification, this whole PFAS issue, the empty drum and oily wastewater are the four that the board feels are, we need to ensure that we're covering every second for the membership. In addition to all these other issues that we're regularly engaged on for everyone. I don't know, John, you wanted to talk about people. I don't know where you want to go with this, Holly, but I mean.
Well, I noticed we did have a question about chlorinated paraffins.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And I see that as one of the issues, we highlighted we wanted to just briefly touch on.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we can say there is we won a battle. The war's still going on. In Europe, the European Chemicals Agency, through its REACH process, was looking at banning the use of mid-chains in the EU, both in terms of formulating products and in articles. We made the case very clearly to I think to their committee structure that if they go forward with what they were looking at as a phase out, that you basically would shut down all sorts of products that are made in the EU using these various machining processes. There was an agreement by the regulatory committees that make up the process within the European Chemicals Agency that more time was needed for metalworking fluids. Originally, they were distinguished between water-based and straight oils. Now they're just saying all metalworking fluids will go to 10 years. And with the 2-year phase in, it roughly is a 12-year process. They were looking at 2 years originally on water-based fluids. So we made some progress there. We're hoping that carries over to the POPs convention, which is this persistent bioaccumulative convention that's run out of Stockholm. And then to EPA and Canada, where Canada's probably going to go out front of EPA in terms of health and environment. Canada looking at perhaps restrictions. And again, our pitch basically is if we can move away from chlorine, we have. Right now, in terms of, let's say, the need to rearm the European Union with munitions and ammunition, you can't get there any faster if you get rid of mid-chains. And so we're continuing to push. John Howell and I had a conversation yesterday about a proposal from EPA just the other day to phase out the use of PIP 3-to-1 as an anti-war agent in certain hydraulic fluids and lubricants. with 5-year phase out. And I think from just a policy standpoint or practical standpoint, we need to tell these folks that you just can't get from here to there that quickly. So we remain very active on this issue. We work very closely with the Chlorinated Paraffins Industry Association, some of the larger manufacturers like Dow out of the American Chemistry Council, to keep pushing on this issue. So we've had some victory here this year on this, but I mean, we still got a ways to go, and we're going to keep pushing on this. And certainly this will be a significant topic at the Metal Working Fluids Conference in Atlanta in January.
And speaking of that, I want to encourage, if you haven't registered yet for the Metalworking Fluids Conference, it's coming up quickly. It's right after the first of the year, January 8th through 24th in Atlanta. And I'm sorry, January 8th through 10th in Atlanta. And we have a number of really great topics. So we do have, it says register before October 20th to save $100, but actually we are having a Cyber Monday special that runs through the end of the week, and you can save $100 if you register this week. So encourage you to, if you're in the area of making metalworking fluids, you definitely don't want to miss this event.
And Holly, this is John, and I might add that one of the papers that I'll be presenting is on the topic of PFAS, the forever chemicals that are everywhere if you look. And just quickly to update the group, I mean, the regulatory environment continues to change with PFAS. There was a proposed drinking water standards back in April. EPA finalized a rule last month, actually this month, September, on toxic reporting inventory. Reporting for manufacturers. Processors were not involved. One of the big things that we have in front of us as lubricant manufacturers is how do you analyze for these things? I had the privilege of attending an ASTM conference at the end of October into November on PFAS analytical methods. And so I'll be sharing the results of what I learned at that conference and a proposal for how the industry, our industry, can handle PFAS analysis at the Metalworking Conference in January. So hope to see many folks on the call at Atlanta, and we'll talk more about it there.
Great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think we had a good discussion, and please keep your eyes on all of our publications. I know Caitlin mentioned that she sent me a note in the Q&A that Jeff's column in November Compoundings covers the used drum issues. So it's very detailed. So you might want to take a look at that. All of our issues of compoundings are available online. If you missed or don't have the November issue anymore, you can access it through the ILMA website. So check that out.
And I think, Holly, when Caitlin does a recap of this town hall, she could probably add a link to that as well as a link to the white paper on EPR.
Okay.
And there are a couple things we could probably link in there, what we put out on Mexico, just a few things just to remind folks. And then certainly call the ILMA office, call Ben or me. I mean, we're happy to help any member at any time on any question they have on any of these issues.
Absolutely. We did Q&A. So I want to thank everybody again for participating today. We had some great questions, and we will be putting out a recording of the session as well as the recap that Jeff referenced. So keep watch for that. And again, thank you very much and have a good week.